The Targaryen dynasty ruled Westeros for nearly 300 years, surviving dragons' deaths, civil wars, and countless threats to their power. Yet the seeds of their ultimate destruction weren't planted by foreign invaders or rebellious lords, but by one king's lustful appetites and final act of spite. Today, we're diving into one of the most consequential moments in Westerosi history, when King Aegon IV Targaryen, known to history as Aegon the Unworthy, legitimized all his bastard children on his deathbed and set in motion a chain of events that would plague the realm for 5 generations. This is the story of how the great bastards tore apart the Targaryen legacy from within, igniting the infamous Blackfyre rebellions that would forever weaken the Dragon Dynasty. To understand how we got here, we need to start with Aegon IV himself, arguably the worst king ever to sit the Iron Throne. George R.R. Martin has described him as the Henry VIII of Westeros, and the comparison is apt. Like Henry, Aegon began his reign young, vigorous, and handsome, skilled with lance and sword. Beloved at court, where he dazzled lords with his wit. But by the end of his life, he had become grotesquely obese, so fat that his legs could barely support his weight, his eyes almost lost in the flesh of his face. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was moral and spiritual as well. Where once stood a promising prince, now sat a corrupt monster who used the Iron Throne solely to serve his basest desires. Aegon's appetite for women was legendary and destructive. While the words of House Targaryen were fire and blood, people joked that Aegon's personal motto should have been, "Wash her and bring her to my bed." He supposedly had any woman he wanted, whether they were married or not, highborn or low. Over the course of his dissolute life, he openly kept 9 official mistresses, whom he proclaimed to have loved, though love for Aegon was a twisted thing indeed. But these 9 were just the tip of the iceberg, out of what some claimed were 900 women he bedded. The man's lust knew no bounds, and neither did the consequences of his actions. The story of Aegon's most consequential bastards begins even before he took the throne. His cousin Daena Targaryen, sister to King Baelor the Blessed, had been locked in the maiden vault by her own brother to prevent her from tempting men, but Daena was willful and found ways to escape her imprisonment. During one of these escapes, she became pregnant by her cousin Prince Aegon, though this wasn't publicly acknowledged until much later. In 170 AC, she gave birth to a son she named Daemon Waters, who would grow up to become the most famous and dangerous of all Aegon's bastards. As king, Aegon's behavior only worsened. His 4th mistress was Lady Barba Bracken, who bore him a son named Aegor Rivers in 122 AC. When Aegon cast Barba aside for a new favorite, Lady Melissa Blackwood, the seeds of one of the most bitter rivalries in Westerosi history were planted. You see, the Brackens and Blackwoods had been feuding for thousands of years, and now that ancient hatred would manifest in Aegon's bastard sons. Melissa Blackwood would give Aegon 3 children, including Brynden Rivers, born in 1775 AC, who would become known as Bloodraven. The fact that Melissa had displaced Barba as the king's favorite only intensified the hatred between Aegor and Brynden. The last of the great bastards was perhaps the most mysterious. Lady Serene of Lys, Aegon's 9th and final mistress, was reputed to be a sorceress of ancient Valyrian descent. She died giving birth to Shiera Seastar, who would grow up to become the greatest beauty in the 7 kingdoms. Both Aegor and Brynden would desire her, but she would choose Bloodraven as her lover, though she refused to marry him despite his many proposals. This romantic triangle would add yet another layer of poison to the rivalry between the 2 half-brothers. Meanwhile, Aegon's treatment of his legitimate family was abhorrent. He despised his sister wife Nyarys, who was gentle, pious, and frail, everything Aegon hated in a woman. He seemed determined to kill her through repeated pregnancies despite her fragile health. He also spread rumors that his heir, Prince Daeron, wasn't actually his son, but the product of an affair between Queen Nyarys and her other brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight. These rumors were almost certainly false. Aemon and Nyarys were devoted to each other, but in a chaste, courtly love fashion, and Aemon even died defending Aegon from assassination. But Aegon spread these poisonous whispers anyway, undermining his own heir's legitimacy out of pure spite. The contrast between Aegon's treatment of his bastards versus his true-born children was stark. When Daemon Waters was just 12 years old in 182 AC, he won a squire's tourney and Aegon knighted him personally. But the king went further than just knighthood. He gifted Daemon with Blackfyre, the ancestral Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen, the very blade that Aegon the Conqueror had wielded. This wasn't just any gift, it was the sword of kings, traditionally passed from one Targaryen ruler to the next. Many saw this as a sign that Aegon intended Daemon to be his true heir, not the bookish Prince Daeron. Daemon grew into everything a king should be, at least in appearance. He was tall and powerful, with broad shoulders and a flat stomach, Targaryen on both sides with all the hallmarks of his house. He was described as half a god among mortal men, perhaps the finest swordsman of his age. When he held Blackfyre, it was said there was not a man who could equal him. Not Ulrich Dane with Dawn, not even Aemon the Dragon Knight with Dark Sister. Meanwhile, Prince Daeron was spindly and round-shouldered, with a little belly that wobbled when he walked. The visual contrast between the two half-brothers couldn't have been starker. In his later years, Aegon seemed to delight in praising Daemon and his other warrior bastard, Aegon Rivers, while maintaining silence about any of Prince Daeron's achievements. Some whispered that Aegon was planning to formally disinherit Daeron in favor of Daemon, though this never came to pass. Instead, something worse happened. In early 184 AC, Aegon fell ill suddenly. His grotesque obesity had finally caught up with him. As he lay dying, in one final act of malice that would echo through the centuries, Aegon IV legitimized all of his bastard children, great and small. This deathbed legitimization was almost unprecedented in Westerosi history. Legitimization of bastards was rare and usually done in the context of succession disputes when legitimate heirs were lacking. But Aegon had a legitimate heir in Prince Daeron, and Daeron had sons of his own. There was no practical reason for this mass legitimization except pure spite, a final poisoned gift to the realm that had to endure his misrule. Prince Daeron ascended the throne as King Daeron II Targaryen, and to his credit, he tried to keep the peace. He was everything his father wasn't: cultured, scholarly, just, and good-hearted. He swept the court clean of his father's corruption and placed competent men in positions of power. He even honored his father's promise to pay for Daemon Blackfyre's wedding to Rohan of Tyrosh, though Daemon had reportedly wanted to marry his half-sister, Princess Daenerys, instead. But Daeron made one decision that would prove catastrophic in combination with his father's legitimization of the bastards. He successfully brought Doran into the Seven Kingdoms through peaceful negotiation, marrying his sister Daenerys to Prince Marin Martell. While this was a magnificent diplomatic achievement, ending centuries of warfare, it infuriated many lords who had spent generations fighting the Dornish. The Dornish received special concessions, keeping their princely titles, maintaining their own laws, and gaining significant influence at court. Daeron's own heir, Prince Baelor, had a Dornish mother and looked more Martell than Targaryen with his dark hair and eyes. The combination of factors was explosive. Here was Daemon Blackfyre, legitimized, holding the sword of kings, looking every inch the warrior king. There was Daeron II, scholarly and unwarlike, surrounded by Dornish advisors, with rumors of his own illegitimacy still circulating. Men began to whisper that the wrong son sat the throne. Warriors who disagreed with the Dornish peace sought out Daemon. Lords who had lost position when Daeron cleaned up his father's corrupt court gravitated toward the charismatic bastard. For years, Daemon resisted these overtures. Despite everything, he seemed content with his life, married to Rohan of Tyrosh, with whom he would have 7 sons and 2 daughters. But 2 people in particular worked to change his mind: his half-brother Aegon Rivers, now known as Bittersteel, and Sir Quentyn Ball, the master-at-arms of the Red Keep. Bittersteel especially seemed driven by pure hatred and ambition. As his nickname suggested, he was angry all his life, quick to take offense, never smiling. He loathed Bloodraven and the Blackwoods, resented his mother's displacement, and perhaps saw in Daemon's cause a chance for the glory and power he felt he deserved. The year 196 AC would go down in history as one of the bloodiest in Westeros. Daemon Blackfyre finally declared his claim to the Iron Throne, reversing the Targaryen colors to take a black dragon on a red field as his sigil, becoming known as the Black Dragon while Daeron was called the Red Dragon. The realm split in half. While the great houses largely remained loyal to Daeron, many of their vassals declared for Daemon. It wasn't just about succession, it was about competing visions of what Westeros should be: martial glory versus peaceful prosperity, traditional supremacy versus Dornish integration. The war raged for nearly a year, with battles in the Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Reach. Daemon began minting his own coins, and for a time, it seemed he might actually win. Everything came down to the Battle of the Redgrass Field in late 196 AC as Daemon's rebel army approached King's Landing itself. The battle was a close-run thing. Daemon shattered Lord Donald Arryn's vanguard and engaged in an epic hour-long duel with Sir Gawain Corbray of the Kingsguard, both wielding Valyrian steel swords. Daemon won, but then made a fatal mistake. He stopped to ensure the wounded Gawain was taken to safety. This moment of chivalry cost him everything. While Daemon was dismounted, Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, had positioned his private force of archers, the Raven's Teeth, on a ridge overlooking the battlefield. From 300 yards away, they loosed their arrows. First, Daemon's eldest son Aegon fell, then young Aemon, and finally Daemon himself, pierced by countless shafts. Some called it murder, others pragmatic warfare. But there was no denying that Bloodraven had killed his own half-brother, becoming a kinslayer in the eyes of many. The death of Daemon and his twin eldest son should have ended the rebellion, but Bittersteel rallied the fleeing rebels and charged directly at Bloodraven's position. The two half-brothers, whose rivalry had been building since childhood, finally met in single combat. Bittersteel took out one of Bloodraven's eyes, but before he could finish the job, Prince Baelor's reinforcements arrived. The rebellion was crushed, but Bittersteel escaped, fleeing across the narrow sea with Daemon's widow, Rohan, and his 5 surviving sons. This was just the beginning. In exile, Bittersteel refused to give up. When he saw other exiled lords beginning to drift away to different sellsword companies, he founded the Golden Company to keep them together. Their motto became, "Beneath the gold, the bitter steel," a reference to their founder. The Golden Company would become the finest sellsword company in the world, but their true purpose was always to seat a Blackfyre on the Iron Throne. The Second Blackfyre Rebellion came in 211 AC, led by Daemon's son, Daemon II Blackfyre. This one was stopped before it could truly begin, with Bloodraven, now Hand of the King, using his extensive spy network to arrest the conspirators at a wedding tourney. Interestingly, Bittersteel refused to support this rebellion, perhaps because he thought young Daemon too much of a dreamer and not enough of a warrior. The Third Blackfyre Rebellion in 219 AC saw Bittersteel personally lead the Golden Company in an invasion after crowning Aegon Blackfyre. Once again, Bloodraven and Bittersteel dueled, and once again, the rebellion failed. Bittersteel was captured but escaped when his ship to the Wall was intercepted, returning to plot in exile. The Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion in 236 AC ended with Daemon III Blackfyre's death at the hands of Sir Duncan the Tall. By this time, the Blackfyre cause was already fading. To most Westerosi lords, they seemed like foreign invaders with dusty old claims rather than legitimate contenders. Bittersteel himself died a few years later in exile, but even in death, his skull was dipped in gold and carried by the Golden Company as a reminder of their purpose. The fifth and final rebellion came in 260 AC, led by Maelys Blackfyre, called Maelys the Monstrous. By all accounts, Maelys was a grotesque figure, supposedly with a second head sprouting from his neck, the remnant of a twin he had absorbed in the womb. He had killed his own cousin to take control of the Golden Company, twisting his head clean off his shoulders. Maelys joined the Band of Nine, a group of pirates and sellswords who each claimed a kingdom for themselves. His claim was the Seven Kingdoms. This became known as the War of the Nine Penny Kings, fought in the Stepstones. It was here that young Sir Barristan Selmy made his name, cutting through the Golden Company ranks to engage Maelys in single combat. When Barristan's sword found its mark, the male line of House Blackfyre was finally extinguished. 5 rebellions over the course of 64 years, tens of thousands dead, the realm bled white multiple times, all because one spiteful king couldn't resist one final act of malice. But the damage went far deeper than just the immediate bloodshed. The Blackfyre rebellions fundamentally weakened the Targaryen dynasty in ways that would contribute to their eventual downfall. First, they established a precedent that Targaryen legitimacy could be questioned. If Daemon Blackfyre could claim to be the rightful king, then the divine right of Targaryen rule was no longer absolute. The dragons were gone, and without them, the Targaryens were just another noble family with a contested claim. Second, the rebellions drained the realm's resources and loyalty. Each war required the Targaryens to call upon their bannermen to spend gold and blood maintaining their throne. Lords who had to choose sides 5 separate times over 3 generations became cynical about the whole enterprise. When Robert Baratheon eventually rebelled, many lords were quicker to abandon the Targaryens because they had seen the dynasty challenged so many times before. The rebellions also created lasting divisions within the realm. Families that had supported the Blackfyres were watched with suspicion for generations. The integration of Dorne, which had been one of the triggers for the first rebellion, remained a source of tension. The realm never fully healed from these wounds, creating fault lines that could be exploited by future rebels. Consider too the personal cost to the Targaryen family itself. The paranoia induced by the Blackfyre threat led to increasing isolation and mistrust. Bloodraven's extensive spy network, while effective against the Blackfyres, created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that poisoned the royal court. When Bloodraven was finally sent to the wall for murdering Aenys Blackfyre under a flag of truce, it was both justice and pragmatism, but it also removed one of the most capable defenders the dynasty had. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Every Targaryen king after Daeron II lived with the knowledge that somewhere across the narrow sea, pretenders waited for their chance. The Golden Company, the finest sellsword company in the world, existed solely to put a Blackfyre on the throne. Even after Meleys died, the fear remained. Some even speculate that the young Griff in our current story might be a Blackfyre descended through the female line, showing that the threat never truly died. The great irony is that Aegon IV probably never intended for things to go this far. His legitimization of his bastards was meant as a final insult to his son Daeron, a last bit of chaos to enjoy from beyond the grave. But in Westeros, as in our world, actions have consequences that ripple through generations. Aegon's momentary spite created a cascade of violence that weakened the dynasty he had inherited and ultimately contributed to its destruction. The rivalry between Bloodraven and Bittersteel became the stuff of legend, 2 bastard brothers whose hatred for each other shaped the fate of kingdoms. Bloodraven, with his 1,000 eyes and his mastery of magic and spycraft, represented one path for maintaining power through surveillance and control. Bittersteel, with his martial prowess and iron will, represented raw strength and determination. Neither could defeat the other decisively, and their conflict outlived them both, embedded in the institutions they created. Even the symbolism tells the story of destruction. The Blackfyres reversed the Targaryen colors, black dragon on red instead of red on black, a mirror image that suggested not just rivalry but fundamental opposition. Every time the golden banner of the company appeared on the horizon, it reminded the realm that the Targaryen hold on power was not absolute, that there was always an alternative, always another claimant waiting in the wings. The tragedy is that many of the Blackfyres might have made good kings. Daemon Blackfyre was beloved by many, a true warrior who showed mercy to fallen foes. His descendants, while perhaps not all worthy, were Targaryens in blood if not in name. The realm bled not because they were monsters, though Meleys certainly was, but because the succession had been muddied by one man's inability to control his appetites and his need to hurt others even in death. Look at what Westeros lost in these rebellions. Thousands of young men who could have been productive citizens died on various Redgrass fields. Noble houses were extinguished or diminished. The realm's treasury was depleted multiple times funding armies. The social fabric was torn as brother fought brother, as old loyalties were tested and broken. All of this weakening happened while real threats gathered beyond the wall and across the narrow sea. When we see the state of Westeros in our current story, with the Targaryens extinct in the male line, the realm fractured by civil war, and various pretenders claiming the throne, we can trace much of this chaos back to that moment when Aegon IV signed his will on his deathbed. The Blackfyre rebellions weren't just a series of wars, they were a cancer that ate away at the Targaryen dynasty's legitimacy, resources, and unity. They transformed the Seven Kingdoms from a united realm under unquestioned Targaryen rule to a powder keg where any spark could ignite rebellion. The Golden Company still exists, still ready to fight for anyone who can pay them, but always remembering their true purpose. The skull of bitter steel, dipped in gold, still watches over them, a reminder that some grudges never die. The sword, Blackfyre itself, was lost, but its symbolism remains. The idea that legitimacy can be granted by steel rather than blood, that might can make right if wielded by the right hands. In the end, Aegon IV's bastards didn't destroy the Targaryen legacy through conquest. They destroyed it through division, through forcing the realm to question who had the right to rule, through bleeding the dynasty's strength away in fratricidal conflict after fratricidal conflict. They created cracks in the foundation that would eventually bring the whole structure tumbling down. The Dance of Dragons may have killed the actual dragons, but the Blackfyre rebellions killed the idea of Targaryen invincibility. When Robert's hammer finally crushed Prince Rhaegar's chest at the Trident, it was just the final blow to a dynasty that had been dying for decades. The Blackfyre rebellions had shown that Targaryens could be challenged, that they could be killed, that they were not gods but men. And in Westeros, as Varys might say, power resides where men believe it resides. Once that belief was shattered by brother fighting brother for 5 generations, it could never be fully restored. This is the true legacy of Aegon the Unworthy. Not just that he was a bad king, but that his badness echoed through time, each echo bringing more death and destruction. His bastards, legitimate and not, great and small, became the instruments by which the Targaryen dynasty tore itself apart. In trying to hurt his son with his final act, Aegon IV ended up destroying his entire house's future. The bitter steel of his bastard's ambitions cut deeper than any foreign enemy's sword ever could. And the golden dragon throne that his ancestors had forged with fire and blood was ultimately lost to the consequences of one man's unworthy life and spiteful death. The story of the Blackfyre rebellions reminds us that in the Game of Thrones, the greatest threats often come from within. It wasn't foreign invaders or natural disasters that weakened the Targaryens most. It was family turning against family, the legitimacy of rule being questioned from inside the dynasty itself. Aegon IV may have been called the Unworthy, but the name doesn't do justice to the magnitude of destruction his actions caused. Through his bastards, legitimized in spite, he created a wound that would fester for generations, bleeding the realm white and ultimately contributing to the fall of the Dragon Kings. The bitter irony is that in trying to undermine his heir, Aegon undermined the very throne he had occupied, proving that even kings cannot escape the consequences of their actions, and that some sins truly do cast shadows that darken generations yet unborn.